Welcome inside the Parisi Palace. High above 2919 East Broadway, this is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local shows, including Solomon on Blast and the Jim Parisi Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, I want to bring back a friend of the program, a gifted percussionist and drummer, and a guy who is all about rhythmic melody. Mtume, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, how you doing, man? You got to excuse me. I'm a little hoarse today, but, you know, the show will go on.
Yeah, the show will go. And listen, let's rest those vocal cords. I want you to settle in. I got an audio queued up here. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to listen to the voice. I also want you to listen to the content, and then I want you to come back and riff on it, okay?
All right. That you have to understand the transplantation, the Atlantic slave trade, and when I deal with two subjects, that is exactly one is called syncretism and acculturation. Syncretism are the African people who went under the Latin Catholic colonizers, French, Spanish, Portuguese. They went to places like Cuba, the Caribbean, Brazil, Haiti. And then acculturation, these are the Africans who went to North America. It's very important. It's important to understand the psychospirituality of what happened to these people. See, so if you notice the African people who went to Cuba and went to Caribbean, they were able to fuse and their religious beliefs with Catholicism, because of the resemblance of the hierarchy of saints, which we have Santeria. They saw the same saints. They endowed the saints of Catholicism with their own saints. This is the basis of Santeria, of Santeria, to endow Ogun with Saint Patrick, Shango with John the Baptist. This is the essence of Santeria. I'm not going to get into heavy detail.
I have a question for you, because this is a great lecture. When you talk about Santeria, that was were these
saints?
Were these acculturated? We don't need to listen to me babbling on there,
They're not acculturated.
Mtume. But who do you think that was?
I have no idea, but it was a great, engaging conversation.
Dude, I could have left that go for 10 minutes. That was Joe Chambers.
Okay.
Okay, and I wanted you. I mean, what out of all that, what got you off? What is the most interesting thing there that caught your ear?
Well, you know what? This is going to sound really strange, but I just was riffing on the many times I've been to Cuba as he was speaking.
Wow.
And the fact that Castro died today.
Exactly.
Wow, we're really talking about this. What a day, you know.
Well, so, I just, to me, this whole idea of syncretism. Have you used that word? I mean, have you stumbled on that word before, in terms of?
No, I haven't.
Because I mean, the other thing is, I just wanted to know if you could talk about the ultimately the roots of, you know, the slave trade and how those rhythms came to the Middle Islands and eventually to the States. This is complete history for people, and it's so important. And I just wanted you to. And listen, I know that you were part of the US program in Los.
Yes, sir.
So can you talk about that and what it meant and really where it stands today?
Well, us, the organization, was an organization that was a cultural nationalist organization, and we created something called, that still celebrates today, called Kwanzaa. In terms of getting back to your original point about the rhythms, you know, everything comes from Africa. We all know that, and everything evolves from the drum. And that period and that transition, Joe was absolutely right. We think of the slave trade from a point of view of being Americans, especially African Americans.
we think of we were dropped off here, but like we were like the third or fourth stop. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you go to Brazil. I remember when I went the first time I went to Brazil, and I went to Bahia. That was the first stop, one of the first stops. Then Cuba, and the various islands. The irony of all of this, to me, brother, is this.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus was trying to find India, and ironically, he never got there. His first stop was actually the Dominican Republic. But we use this phrase, West Indies. That was created because he thought he was west of India. And that's how that phrase came.
I love this.
So people say West Indies. Like, what does that really mean? It really has no meaning. He was lost, and he thought he was west of India. There go West Indies. But the travel of the drum, by the time we got here to the United States, it began to merge with all these American styles, and I'll point in particular jazz. The godfather of introducing the conga to jazz is a gentleman by the name of Chano Pozo, who hooked up with Dizzy Gillespie, and he was a Cuban. Matter of fact, the first time I went to Cuba, the first thing I asked to do, I had the interpreter take me to Chano Pozo's house. It's a shrine. But when Chano Pozo hooked up with Dizzy Gillespie, that was the beginning of the merger of the African rhythms with jazz.
Okay, so I want you to riff on this because you alluded to the Columbus and west of the Indies. I interviewed Chico Freeman earlier this week, and he's an ethnomusicologist as well. And we were talking about the banjo, the string instruments. Universities and libraries started in Timbuktu. Okay,
right.
Okay, all the string instruments came from Africa, and I've put up a couple of things here. He said he was focused on these two kings, Mansa Kankan Musa, and another name that I'm not going to pronounce. But the point is that he did this album called Kings of Mali, and he talked about this whole idea of just the significance of the motherland, that this is where we are all from. And some cats, I've been putting up these posts about the history. For instance, like he just talked about the history of the drum predated that because all the drums in Africa were made from logs and trees. Those rhythms came from Africa. But I put up a lot of this stuff, and people are like, "No, it was India first. India was before." Can we dispel that, or is there truth to India?
Well, yeah. History dispels that. That's not a matter of discussion. That's just a matter of fact. All you got to do is look. I don't even know how to address that. That's like saying United States is older than Egypt. That's not a discussion. It's just fact. India adopted the drums, as did every other early culture. The drums, but they brought their own thing to it. When you listen to the Indian drums and their rhythms, I found them very interesting because I was always very interested in the tabla and the sitar and the fact that they played in very interesting time signatures, and so everybody brought what they brought, but there's not a discussion of where the drum came from.
Exactly.
I can't even engage in that as a serious conversation.
To me, this is like, it's a bit of a maiden voyage for me. Joe broke it down in a very deep fashion. It's hard for me to, like, you might have retired from the music industry, but I don't believe for a second that you have ever stopped teaching the roots of.
Oh no.
I want you to talk to the worldwide audience as best you can about how you try to have an impact today with specifically African American kids today. If you have opportunities to talk to cats who are caught up in other facets of music and maybe don't go back to the. What Chico told me, which was crazy, was what blew my mind, was that the event, a certain portion of Africans came to the States, and then all of a sudden it was they took the European, they took the cymbal, they took the tom-tom, they took the snare drum, they took the bass, and they made the first dude to invent a trap set was black. He said that the first cat to play the invention of the trap set was Sid Catlett. Now that's still up for discussion, but the point is that
I kind of would, I'm not that deep of a student, but that would raise a serious question to me.
Why?
I just don't know. I just don't recall anybody in my travels or in my readings ever saying Sid Catlett kind of basically created the trap drum.
I think maybe he was the first one to okay, again, I mean
maybe popularized, but not. I don't think he created. Bigfoot Sid Catlett, yeah, but I never heard that.
Right.
And I grew up around all the old cats. Remember, man,
No, so
I really don't know. That's something I have to examine. Well, who was the first cat to play? Who was the first African American to start playing the sax? I don't know.
Dude, it's so great to talk. Thank you for being open-minded about that. I mean, we're learning on the fly, but can you, bring it into modern day? How do you try to make this relevant for younger cats?
Well, it started for me, many, many years ago when the transition from R&B and funk began to migrate into hip-hop. And, sampling became, the mode of creating music, taking bits and pieces from other songs, pre-recordings, mixing them up and coming up with your own thing. Now, I always told all the young brothers and sisters, sampling is cool, but it's a pit stop. You're not supposed to live there. You stop there to get your tires changed and your oil, but then you have to go on. It's a pit stop. And unfortunately, a lot of people stayed there and ultimately never learned how to create music for themselves. I always looked at sampling as somebody being able to make a quilt. Well, a quilt is made of many other blankets, but ultimately you got to learn how to make your own blanket. And so I've always talked about the need for the combination of the two. I don't down hip-hop. I think it was a very creative thing because, first of all, for young black kids, music was taken out of the schools. Where would they play?
Right.
When's the last time anybody's seen a music store in a black neighborhood? Maybe 30 years ago. I've yet to see one. For years, you go to Harlem. There's no music store. So it was like the genius of desperation that brought about sampling.
Wow.
It also kept the DNA of funk and R&B alive for kids who never really heard it. These samples of, P-Funk and all these other great artists, it maintained itself through sampling. But now a lot of the cats have gotten to the point where they're really playing with a band. And I find that terribly interesting.
Do you think that where you say it's a pit stop, is it something that it's their responsibility to find the next stop, or do you know what that next? Can you enlighten people?
No. That's a great question. Well, I can only give you my answer.
Yeah, please.
And my feeling was always this: we have to go back to the period when the hip hop was first starting, and there was a great social divide, in the black community between older blacks and younger blacks, especially black men. And many in my generation denigrated, hip hop and rap, talking about it wasn't music, and Marvin Gaye and all. Okay, that's great. But each generation brings its own music, and that's how I always felt about it. But that divide also gave a lot of anger to a lot of young black hip hop artists who felt that they weren't getting respect. And my point is, if you have all old people with no youth, your glass is half empty.
Mm-hmm.
All youth with no age, your glass is half full. And without both, you got half a glass of music.
Wow. So what you're beginning to illuminate for me is I've been constantly talking about this break. There was a break in the linkage of the chain. There were some links in the chain.
Yeah.
And so the communication and cooperation between older and younger cats broke down, really.
Right. I call it a breakdown in the cultural continuity.
You're nailing this stuff. I want to also talk to, so let's pivot on this. Odin Pope. Do you know that cat, that horn player out of Philly?
Man, don't insult me like that.
on younger cats who are trying to pick up instruments and play. And this is what he told me. He said, we'd get together at John Coltrane's house as well as Hassan Ibn Ali's house. The first thing we would do for the first 2 hours is just play scales. We would play chromatic scales, major scales, octaves, long tones. We would just do that, what that entailed. It would enable you to play all over your instrument. The tenor saxophone is 2 octaves and a fifth. We used to play from the low B flat all the way up to the high F on major scales and minor scales, augmented scales, diminished scales, double diminished scales. We would play all the different kinds of scales, and that would open you up to be able to play in tune all over your instrument. Do you think, or do you believe that is something that's missing within people's ability to play in tune all over their instrument today? Do they understand how to play all over their instrument?
Well, that's a great question, and it goes again to what I'm saying. It's about the transfer and dissemination of information. If somebody doesn't know these things, so I mean, you're reading that, and that's great. But how many young brothers or sisters or young people, period, is people like Odin teaching? That's where I'm at. I mean, it's almost like we end up preaching to the choir. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And my whole thing is, young people don't know these things, and I don't blame them for not knowing. I blame my generation for not teaching.
But I mean, didn't you guys essentially have one hand tied behind your back in the sense that the larger point of Odin's thing is that this was just practice. Ultimately, whether it was a church in Philadelphia or clubs, these guys were playing every night, so they could figure it out on the bandstand. I mean,
yeah, but everybody did that. I mean, that's my point. I mean, he's basically laying out the blueprint for what everybody did.
But there really are no. I mean, there are no venues to play in. I mean, your pops and Tootie played at Jazz at Lincoln Center. That's a venue. That's really. I mean, it's nice that there's just not the propensity of live venues to really understand to play in tune all over your instrument. That's my feeling now. You can't just.
Well, there's no place to. You're right. I mean, again, that's not a question for debate. I absolutely agree. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, what do we do? Do we complain about? Because that's not going to change. I did a lecture once in Washington at this music organization, and that question came up. People were complaining, well, there's no more clubs. Well, social media also gives you the opportunity to go to the people instead of trying to wait for the people to come to you. I mean, you have the internet. I mean, there's other ways. I think we have to rethink how we introduce this music to young people. They're not coming to you. They don't even know about you.
Right.
So you have to go to them. There has to be websites created where you're teaching these young people who want to get access to you. The days of the club is over.
The days of the club.
I don't fight reality, man. I deal with it.
No. You're okay. Let's rest those vocal cords again. I got another name that voice. I think you're going to nail this one, and it's about you. So just settle in for a minute. Hold on.
All right.
I'm looking back here. How did you get your Swahili name?
Mtume.
Mtume gave you your name.
Yeah, he gave. Mtume named me and his whole family, and Mtume was a very strong member of the US organization at the time, which is in Los Angeles, and they were trying to learn Swahili as a language that we had abandoned, as our own way of communicating. So he said, so it was necessary for us to learn some African language, which was Swahili. So he named me, his whole family, right now, today, all his kids, his grandkids, his wife, and he named Herbie Hancock, by the way, his name. That's where the M1Dishi came from.
He named him M1Dishi?
That's where it came from Mtume, yeah.
It means
composer.
All right, boss. Who is that voice?
Well, yeah, that's my uncle. That's my uncle.
That's
Tootie
right.
Boomer.
That's right.
Heath, yeah.
So let's just first of all talk about your relationship with your uncle, and also let's not be shy here. That's to me that was serious knowledge. I never knew. I always just assumed that it was the sextet that Herbie doled out those names, and here it is. I mean, can you tell the audience where your head was at to the point where you were doling out? I mean, to me, that's the kind of thing that can be done on new media now. Is this? So can you talk about where that? It's the simplistic answer is you felt like people were not connected to their roots, so you were going to go back to and give everyone their Swahili names, but it was a group consciousness thing. Can you go back and just talk a little bit about what you were thinking at that time and ultimately how that idea came to you?
Well, we have to go back to when I left Philadelphia to go to school in California, where I met Karanga, and then us organizations, we all adapted Swahili names because of as I said, we're trying to reconnect with our culture. And we were about creating names, giving ourselves names, also creating holidays. Like I said, we created Kwanzaa.
You created Kwanzaa. You're saying you created...
Us organization. Yeah, I was there at the first Kwanzaa, man, 47, 8 years ago.
Yeah. Happy... Well, that's so cool, man. Thank you so much. Go ahead. That's so amazing.
So, I'm a musician, too. So, remember, cats come to play... either at the place called the Lighthouse or Shelley's Manhole.
Sure.
And so when Kumba, he was with the Mwandishi then, so I would go out to hear the cats, every because all we had was records, on the West Coast. So when the guys would come through, we would rush to get to the club so we could hear the music. So Herbie at that time became very interested in what we were trying to do culturally. So one day I went, and the band said, well, look, we all want Swahili names. So I said, well, give me, each one of y'all give me your quality, what you think your best quality is. And then I found the Swahili equivalent. And Kumba was absolutely right. Mwandishi means composer. And he actually did an album, called that, But, that's what was happening.
And then, I mean, beyond just being interested in what you were doing, ultimately it was also about incorporating the most indigenous African rhythms in the music, because that also, I'm trying to get the idea, was that the band that your uncle was in when you caught up with them?
Yeah. It was Herbie. Of course, it was his band. Herbie, Eddie Henderson was on trumpet.
Right.
Joe Henderson was on sax.
It was like Garnett Brown, maybe.
On trombone.
Exactly. You see, this is the thing, because he did Fat Albert.
Buster Williams on bass.
Right. And it was Johnny Coles, or it was Eddie Henderson.
Johnny Coles was there at first, and then Eddie Henderson came. I can't remember exactly what year.
Exactly. And so those, because I mean, to me, it was. I mean, can you talk about? I guess one of the things that would be helpful for me and the audience is for you to suggest some texts and or things that you have written that can provide some enlightenment. As so far, education is just so key. And I would like you to talk about, ultimately the stuff that you were inspired by in your youth to get to the point where you were like, I'm going to give my older sages, my mentors, their names.
You know what? You drifted out on me, and I didn't hear your last 2 sentences.
Just because to me, it's invigorating that as a younger cat, you decided to give your mentors and brothers and sisters their Swahili names. And I just wanted you to talk about some writing, some books, or stuff that you relied on heavily at that time for education.
Wow. In the beginning, I'm going back.
Or even...
No. I'll give you some names. Yeah. I mean, quickly. Crisis, a great book written called Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And the author is slipping me right now.
And why did that resonate with you? I mean, what was the?
No, I'm giving you books. See, I'm not quite clear what you're asking. I mean, I've read so many different books on so many subjects.
I guess it was more to the idea of like Herbie was interested in what you were doing.
Yes, he was interested in the whole cultural nationalist thing. So when he came, and when they asked me for the names, I didn't just walk up and give it. I mean, they requested it. And, you got to go back to that period. We're talking about, late 60s. And there was a cultural revolution happening in this country, both with younger blacks and younger whites. You had the whole anti-war movement that was happening with young and white students. And we were doing, the black cultural movement for the African Americans. Also, I came right after, we were the generation right after the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
Like my parents' heroes and was Martin Luther King. Ours was Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. So it was a different frame of reference. I don't know if that helped you.
No, I think that it ties into what you didn't hear this part.
And I think this is important too. It just hit me. Also remember that the 60s was the first generation of African Americans who, for the most part, all went to college, or most went to college. As a generation, that was the first time that happened. So when you go to college, you start reading and learning more about Africa, because that was the beginning of the African liberation movement. So, you had this worldwide connection.
That's absolutely true. One of the things that Tootie said at the beginning, because I talked to him the day after the election day, and he said Mtume called this reckoning. And for the record, I about a year and a half ago, I saw it coming as well. I called it. I actually feel very invigorated and confident now in my prediction now that. And he said you called it. You saw this coming, and I'm just wondering if you could explain. Essentially, I have many questions, but the most important ones was this because Trump spiked the white vote. He spiked it, like he got it to like an obscene number, and he got it in rural counties in the swing states. He got people out and invigorated. And I'm trying
look, I'll give you my answer. First of all, you're right.
I just want to ask the question: was this truly at the core, when you strip it all away, much more about the fact that there are just 35 to 40% of this country that believes exactly what Trump says, but they just don't say it?
Sure, that's a given. But let's examine the point you made, which I totally agree with. Okay, we can say he spiked the white vote, but look, let's examine what does that mean. What he did was expose to white people who had been pretty much disengaged and dismissed by both parties for the last 30 years, and he exposed to them the fact that the Republicans had picked poor white people worse than Democrats because they just used them. And that both parties, I say, my saying is this: left wing or right wing is on the same bird. And politically, that's where we're at. And what he did was expose the fact that those who have lost so much, and the fact that the white vote hadn't been spoken to. And he exposed that, but it was deeper than that, because that doesn't explain how he got a third of the Latino vote.
That's right.
Tell me that. I mean, after calling them, murderers, rapists, how do you get a third? And he got more of the black vote than most people realize. It's just that a lot of black people didn't want to say they voted for him. I think he touched a nerve, and the entire media was wrong, and they were too arrogant to acknowledge it. They thought he was a joke. He'd flame out. I predicted he would win the primary in June, and in December, I said he would win the presidency.
That's right.
I also felt the Democrats have just used people of color like a backdrop, and they come out every 4 years for that vote. But they've done nothing for the inner cities. And yes, I'm including the last 8 years.
Is it but okay, so I agree with you basically on everything, and I think that we saw it coming, and a lot of people just didn't want to even acknowledge it, especially in the media. But, I mean, the truth is, Barack Obama was basically shut off from any legislative cooperation early on. I mean, there's only so much one guy can do in a quote-unquote democracy. I mean, does it really fall on him? I know he's not...
There's things you can do, and then there's something called signs you can show. And what do I mean by that? Let me give you a great example. I'm talking about 96% of the black vote for those 2 terms went to President Obama. Not once did he ever come and campaign in any black area in America. Both terms. He never gave a speech in an urban area. Never. With the horrific murder rate in this country of young black men to each other, Chicago is Chirac. He's never spoken out about gang violence. He never went to one funeral of a black kid. He's going to many funerals for young white kids. And I mean, all loss of life is terrible. But he basically had not shown any attention to those problems that you can send a signal to. Do you know how that could affect young kids? The president speaking out on it? He never spoke out on the murder rate in Chicago. They're getting ready to go into 700 murders this year. He's never talked once about black violence. These are the things that I'm saying. I know his hands were tied. I mean, I'm not a fool. But we also, I blame my community because we also didn't demand anything. See, a vote gets you to first base. An agenda gets you a home run. The black community never had an agenda with President Obama. We were just glad he was there. Well, he made history that can never be changed. But we never required him to do anything for us.
Can you talk about one request or advocacy that movement that you did under, I guess, your leader at the time with Malcolm X? I mean, can you give an example of something you did beyond just the idea of saying, well, he was there for 8 years and he was scandal free like Obama, and it's in the history books. What was something from a policy point of view that you guys as younger African Americans drove home?
Well, I'm confused with me. I'm not a younger African American.
No, well,
No, when I said Malcolm was dead. Malcolm was dead in 65.
Right.
I'm saying, but we were more out of his philosophy and Elijah Muhammad. That's what I meant. My parents were more Martin Luther King. There was we had Stokely. There was a young leadership. The Black Power leadership came in. Stokely Carmichael, Black Panther movement. These things, we were different than our parents. There was a different political agenda. Right now, as a 70-year-old African American, my message is that young people demand something for their vote. I was very proud that millennials, a lot of them sat it out. You know why? Because they began to understand just voting means nothing. If you look, for the last 8 years, I really applaud the gay community. They got everything they wanted and more out of this president. And I applaud that.
Right.
You have an agenda.
Right.
Young millennials, they don't follow it. Look, Bernie Sanders lit them up, and I was very proud to see that. I just hated the fact that he dropped out, because I really believe he could have won.
I do too. He didn't drop out; he got ripped off.
Well, what I mean by dropped out, I agree. Well, I should be more specific. When they made him and he agreed to nominate her, I thought that was a step down. He didn't need to do that. He could have somebody else do that. And then all these young people that he inspired, you left them out in the cold. They weren't going to go to Hillary, and they weren't going to Trump. And they sat it out. But see, I applaud that. I don't think you just have to vote. You vote for something. Have a reason. And if neither candidate, I don't believe in that lesser of two evils. Forget that. Why should there be evil? And I think also this election shows us the cancerous, beyond repair state of having a two-party system in this country. It is ridiculous. it is no longer functional. It's like we have choices in everything. You have a radio station. How many radio stations are on the air? Thousands. You have a choice.
Right.
Why is it that when it comes to electing the highest office in this country, your only choice is vanilla or chocolate, Democrat or Republican? It's crazy. We don't even have there's some countries, maybe 6 parties are running. You're locked in a cycle where they just change who's in position every 4 or 8 years. And that's what America is facing now. The decay of a decrepit system that has to be changed. It's got to be blown up. You need to at least have a third party. I didn't mean to rant like that.
No.
You know.
I mean, Mtume, I want you to fly away, and I want you to go and create. One question I want to leave you with on Thanksgiving before we connect sometime in the future is this idea of saying, okay, you can sit it out, okay, but how are you going to educate yourself? Are you going to do it in a privatized college situation where you're really not going to get the education that cats once did? How are you going to educate yourself? How are younger millennials going to get hip to the idea of decay, essentially, and then ultimately come up with an agenda? Like you said, the gay rights movement, they had an agenda and they pushed it and they continued to do it.
Right.
It's not just about not voting. It's about saying, well, what do you stand for? And I think that is critical to me, and that is something that, in fact, I'd like to pick up with you on sometime down the road. I'm short on time, but to me, like that's the.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Let me just say this.
Go ahead.
I'm not. My point is not advocating not voting. My point is advocating. Think of what you want to demand for your vote. You
right.
See, that's what my community no longer. The last time we had an agenda to respond to that point was in 1963, when Martin Luther King and the leaders of the civil rights movement sat down with Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he told them, "If you give me your vote, I promise I will pass a civil rights bill." That's an agenda, and they gave him the vote, and he passed the civil rights bill. That's what I'm talking about. We've had no agenda. You had some puppet, the Democrats, you elect them, they pick a couple of black people that they call your leaders. And then they tell you whatever they want to tell you. But it's BS. But that's what I'm saying. What the civil rights movement did was an agenda. We'll give you the vote, and we want this for it. I'm not advocating don't vote. I'm advocating think. And stop thinking that a vote is all it's about. Right. It doesn't mean anything if you get nothing for it. That's political insanity.
Well, it's Mtume. Go rest your cords. Love your family. Happy Thanksgiving, baby. We'll be in touch.
Great, man. Look, I'm here. Look, I love talking with you, man. I don't do this. I'm doing it with you. Anytime you want to rap, man, we can do this. Okay?
Love you, brother. Happy Thanksgiving, man.
All right, man.
Yeah, peace.
Take care.
All right. We'll be right back on the Jake Feinberg Show with Jerry Cortez.